Hi class. I think we stopped last time with the typical, the previous video is about typical household water use. This kind of is a breakdown of what the consumption of water in a normal United States household is. This is unique to the United States. Now I'm going to go into slightly more controversial territory. We have talked about this, I think in the previous videos, we talked about how it's estimated that 2.6 billion people are going to, at some point of time, suffer from a lack of water, which is, according to the UN statistics, you are going to see about 2/3 of the world having a problem with drinking water supply, that is arable water or potable water. Hold on a second. Let me just make this big, okay? Oh, there you go. That's better. So what, for example, if you take a place like Bangladesh, that is a very, almost a flat, low-lying area right close to the ocean. They've been in kind of a pseudo drought for a really long time. That is that when I say pseudo drought, I mean, what I mean to say here is that they do get rains, but it is not enough rain to sustain, like, the main crop that they grow out there is rice. So there's enough rain, there is rain for life, but not enough rain to sustain agriculture. And one of the things we've noticed because of that is a predominantly agrarian society like Bangladesh now is predominantly a manufacturing society, and everybody remembers all the different inhumane and horrible working conditions, the building that fell down and burnt and a whole bunch of people died in them. The reason why people are willing to work for less than pennies on a dollar is because of the fact that there is no agriculture. The agrarian society has pretty much been decimated due to lack of rain. We're talking about lack of rain here. Really, the agriculture, rice production uses up a ton of water. It's almost that the land has to be waterlogged, so it has to be flooded with water. When you start having less rains, that means you have less fresh water. Obviously, a country like Bangladesh does not have the money for a desalination plant. You tend to see mass migrations from villages into cities. When you see this mass migration from villages into cities, you're also going to see huge slum populations. So like we were talking about in chapter 9 that we're doing right now in class, when you have these slum kind of living situations, you have disease, lack of sanitation, there is a ton of social and health problems that arise from it. That also puts people in a situation where they do have to work in the most inhumane and horrible conditions, because at the end of the day, they have to feed their families. It increases the number of people in the labor market, which kind of reduces wages. And we have talked about this. Okay, in case you guys heard a screeching bark, that was Tinkle. Again, I think in the previous slides I have talked about, in the previous video, I've talked about the cost of water itself. In the United States, water costs much less, even though we use a lot more because we have enough resources. We already have plants that have been set up for cleaning of water and all of that stuff. And I will in class talk about the Flint, Michigan problem, and I am going to expect you guys to know that. I am going to expect you to know that. I'm not going to go into the details of the Flint, Michigan problem right. Besides that, our water is a lot cleaner, so we are not required to boil the water, clean up the water, and all of that stuff. So the cost of water is much lower. So as I was talking about the Flint, Michigan problem, I will be talking about the Flint, Michigan problem in class probably tomorrow. So you need to know that it is, I am going to expect you to use it as an example. So write it down. I'm not going to go into detail here. So as we were talking about groundwater in your aquifers, once they're depleted, they are gone for good. It takes thousands of years to actually reset, to fill these aquifers. In the United States, one of the biggest culprits in terms of getting groundwater out is agriculture. So, yay for local farming. The Ogala aquifer is actually a very good example, and you can see out here where it's almost the brown parts is completely dewatered. Once they are dewatered, they become aquitard. The areas that's the water is completely depleted. The soil has gotten very, very thick. So it actually becomes a barrier. Where's my cursor? It actually becomes a barrier. So the water from this area is really not going to get into this area anymore because it has a physical barrier. The aquichards become a physical, thick, soil-filled barrier that does not allow water to go inside. This area, water is lost for good. Now, states like North Dakota and Texas have pumped out a lot of the groundwater to support their fracking industry. So while fracking not only the gases that come out of fracking not only potentially contaminate the drinking water supply, they also pull water out of the aquifers because fracking is a very water intense industry. So these are a couple of things that I need you to kind of keep in mind when you're writing your essays. It's very important to have essays that have current, information that's current, information that's things that's going on today. Environmental science is not just a historical, it's not just 5 or 6 topics that you're going to learn. It kind of tries to tie in things that are happening today. So when you're talking about of this aquifer particularly, you have to bring up the fact that there's the aquichards. There's actually the fact that there is a lot of this water has been used by the fracking industry, and these are dead zones that cannot be refilled at present. There's not enough rain in Texas to fill this water up. So here are a couple of things according to the UN is the problem with depleted aquifers. One is obviously the lowering of the water table itself. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory: lowering of the water table, increased cost of the water itself. It actually becomes extremely prohibitive. Reducing the surface water supply. Some of these, in the previous slides, we've talked about certain areas, the artisan areas, where the water pumps itself out, and then because of the pressure differential, the water pumps itself, like the water spouts out, and then you have natural, lakes and stuff like that that are formed around it. So there is a depletion of the surface waters. The biggest problem that you are going to see, and that cannot be that we do not have a way of combating it right now, is land sustenance. Oh, okay, that word. It occurs when the groundwater in the bottom provides support to the land on top. When you start using the groundwater to such an extent, the soil actually collapses. So the land actually collapses under its own pressure, and there is no way for you to bring that land back up. It's not like you can pump concrete in there. You could, but then that creates an aquitard that stops any kind of water from being filled up again. In a place like California, where 60% of the groundwater is gone, this is a huge problem. Also, considering that we sit on a fault line, the land actually receding, the height of the land receding and putting more pressure on a fault line can be a huge problem. The other thing, again, this is just explaining that term, subsistence. Okay, settling. Saltwater intrusion. I'm going to go to the next slide that kind of gives you a better idea than just the definition. Obviously, the definition is here. This is, again, a problem in places that are coastal. So if you had if the water table in Connecticut was depleted, or the water table in California that is being depleted, anything that's closer to the ocean, because of the, water flows from high pressure to low pressure, high concentration to low concentration, the salt water like moves into these depleted water, what do they call, into the depleted aquifers. And once you have salt water move in, two things happen. One, you've filled up that land with water that's not usable. And then if and when the water like evaporates, leaves the system, it leaves a ton of salt behind. So once it leaves a ton of salt behind, you have actually ruined the soil on top. Because soil turns over, you've kind of ruined the soil on top. This has happened in California once before because of the Dust Bowl, and it's not that it is not going to happen again. The other thing most countries are doing right now is a diversion of water, using water from one place to another to kind of, it's essentially kicking the can down the street. China, we always tend to think of China as little people making our iPhones, and Samsungs and whatever other phones there are, but they are a very agrarian society. Remember, I think we've talked about this in class, how most of your organic farming comes from China. They are heavily invested in agriculture, but they're facing the exact same problems with rain as any other part of the world. So there is a huge diversion of water that's happening from the rivers and tributaries and all of that stuff, which is at present just kicking the can down the street as far as building these canals to move water around. In the previous videos, we talked about the Aral Canal, where they diverted the water, and then eventually the tributaries couldn't be filled because of lack of rain. And not only did it kill off the original source of water, it also killed off the canals. So diversion of water is just a way to kick the can down the street, but nothing more than that. Dams are another thing that's, they provide what we all need, cheap electricity and jobs, and they reduce flooding. But on the other hand, sometimes, like in California, we have the delta smelt that's causing, because of which we do not allow water into certain parts because the smelt lives there. Dams are a great way to conserve water, to divert water, and all of them. Again, like I said in the previous slide, diverting water from one area to another is just kicking the can down the street. Now, as you can see, here are a few downsides of having a dam. Now, in the United States, this land is actually purchased by the government under the eminent domain. It does cause earthquakes because of the amount of pressure it puts in. It blocks fish migration. But on the other hand, if you have the delta smelt that's like sitting on the dam and like causing farmers not to have water, that is also another downside of it. And then by building a dam and by flooding certain areas, you definitely are causing problems with native species. So you're allowing for invasive species to come in. One of them is the delta smelt. There's also, over a period of time, when you divert water, you do cause sedimentation downriver. I do not need to explain to you guys what sediment is or sedimentation is. By increasing sedimentation in certain areas, one of the biggest problems is there is a loss of habitat that happens. There's a loss of nutrients that happens. I think we've talked about this in the past. One of the reasons we have to take like our food supply does not have enough magnesium in it, does not have enough iron in it, and we need supplements for that, is because we have dams that stop flooding. So when a land floods, it actually brings in new soil with a lot of different metals in it that we actually need, and plants take it in, and then your fruits and vegetables have certain concentrations of these. Right now, because of the dams, we don't have flooding, so we take